Greetings, I'm Christoph Simpson, a member of Lands. I'll be doing this week's update. So, we'll be covering the dates March 13 to March 19 of 2021, and we have five topics to talk about. The first will be the $10,000 basket that the PNP was talking about in Parliament. The second will be minimum wage. The third will be BOJ and currency. The fourth will be the new COVID measures that the government may announce next week. And the last will be vaccine diplomacy. So the first three topics fall under the general area of the economy, and then the next two topics more relate to healthcare. As a political movement, we have to be concerned with things that are said and done by different politicians, whether they're government or opposition. So when we're criticizing the JLP, we're not necessarily supporting the PNP, or vice versa. When we criticize the PNP, we're not necessarily supporting the JLP. We are our own political movement, we have our own agenda, and we're really free to criticize either party. We are also free to agree with either party in a moment based on whether their position aligns with our own. But we are not aligned with either party in general. We may just share a position with one or the other in a given moment, depending on the issue or on principles or so on. So this week, as opposed to only criticizing the government, we will also be criticizing the opposition. So with the first topic, the $10,000 basket. Mark Goling went to Parliament and he was talking about a $10,000 basket of goods. Now, in economics, a basket of goods is actually a thing people refer to. Not a literal basket, but the idea that you select specific items and you track the prices of those items in different years and you use that to measure inflation. So if the average price, like if the items, the price increase was an average of a certain percent, you report that. That is how they measure whether prices are increasing in general. So they try to select goods that people would commonly buy and so on. So Mark Golding claimed to have spent $10,000 buying some goods, and he was making the point that $10,000 could have bought more some years ago. Now, there are disputes about the truth of the prices, disputes about the accuracy of the prices, and so on. And even when Julian Robinson went to Parliament with a big chart with some prices, some persons disputed them. But some other persons were saying they're even seeing prices more expensive than those. And reality is that prices vary across the country. But another reality is that on average, persons who earn minimum wage spend close to half their income on food. That is something that came out recently, this month, if I'm not mistaken. Persons who earn minimum wage were found to spend, on average, half of their income on food alone. So, the issue of people struggling to afford food and consumer goods is really an issue. We shouldn't discount that. So, we were not pleased with how the JLP politicians reacted to Mark Golding making that point. And we're not pleased with how persons were just overall dismissing the seriousness of this household's ability to get food, right? So, with that said, we were happy to see what Mark Golding was saying, but he went on and did some. Well, he went on and said some other things later in the week, which disappointed us because we thought he was on a good track to holding the government accountable, but he now seems like he was just being opportunist. So the next topic is minimum wage, which isn't unrelated to the first topic because people feel their purchasing power decreasing, and some people will feel that prices are rising higher than their income. Um, Mark Golding said that we should do away. This is according to Nationwide. Mark Golding said that we should do away with minimum wage and adopt a living wage. This, as we said, is just semantic posturing. It really actually doesn't mean anything. Having a living wage means raising the minimum wage to somewhere where it is a livable wage. They're not mutually exclusive concepts. If you establish a living wage, you'll have to raise the minimum wage to that number. So we'll still need a minimum wage. Minimum wage isn't a term that is supposed to be stigmatized. Minimum wage just literally means this is legally the lowest an employer is allowed to pay you. So if you believe everybody is entitled to a living wage, then you calculate what a living wage would be and you raise minimum wage to that living wage, right? Now, this has been a position of lands for years. We've made multiple submissions to the Ministry of Labor when they hold their minimum wage advisory commission sessions and so on. But we've never gotten a response, and the government doesn't seem to have been interested in acting on these proposals. But these are very simple things that the Ministry of Labor could do, or even the Ministry of Finance could do. In the same way they talk about a basket of goods, we could analyze certain prices in the economy and say, okay, these are what we expect somebody's living expenses to be. You could say, and in our submission we gave an example. We gave a table and said, okay, say how much you expect a household to spend on rent, or how much you expect a person in a household to spend on rent, utilities, food, transportation, and so on. And just be frank about how you expect people to live. When you say that if you decide to raise minimum wage to $50,000 a month, be clear. How do you expect people to survive on $50,000 a month? Right now, minimum wage is around $30,000 a month. It's $7,000 a week, and there are 52 weeks in the year. So it's around $30,000 a month for minimum wage right now. But yeah, the government could do that. Say exactly how you expect people to live on minimum wage. So say you expect them to spend this amount on this, that amount on that, and so on, right? It's pretty simple. Um, when you do that, you can say, okay, if what the government is saying cannot actually afford rent, obviously the government needs to revisit the figure, or the government needs to be frank and say, okay, we expect that a minimum wage person wouldn't be able to live alone. They should find a roommate or a partner to live with or something. But we could have those honest conversations. If you're saying we should spend this on this, then we should expect to see that price, or you're telling us to go do this and whatnot. It's really as simple as that. So you can calculate a living wage, and you can calculate how you expect somebody to live on that wage that you claim is a living wage, and you can raise minimum wage to that. That is something that we have been pushing. But another thing we have to factor is that when you rise people's purchasing power, the suppliers of their goods and services will demand more money. So right now, even while you feel like you can barely afford things, you're getting by. And when you get more income, the capitalists are going to just want to suck that out of you. They say, okay, if you were only getting paid $7,000 a week and you are willing to buy something for $700, if your pay raises to $10,000 a week, you will be able to spend $1,000 now. And everybody raises their prices. This isn't because labor for them is more expensive necessarily. For some, it will be, but that's not necessarily the case. It is just them taking advantage of the fact that you have more money and you're more able to spend, even if you'll still be struggling. You're more able to spend as far as they're concerned. So we need to put things in place as well. And by we, I mean the country. So the government needs to put things in place as well to regulate rent and so on. So there are rent regulations and stuff, but also people need to know what these things are. They could be putting price caps on rent, like rent caps. So you could have it rent capped per square foot or per number of bedrooms or so on, or both. So you establish some sort of standards. Maybe these already exist and they're not being enforced enough on rent places being offered and so on. But the government can actually look into that. And the thing is, if they do already exist, they need to be a little more strict because rent in Kingston, for example, is not something minimum wage people can afford to actually have a place to themselves. A lot of people end up having to share a rented space with somebody else and subletting and whatnot. And yeah, so maybe that's something that we'll just have to continue, but the government can be at least honest about, okay, we don't expect you to afford rent and have your own place. We want you to share. So yeah, raising minimum wage to be a living wage is a thing we should look into, but it can't just be about raising wages. We need to be able to regulate prices of things like rent and utilities. We have our electricity company is majority owned by foreign companies, the Marubeni Corporation and another electricity company that's in Korea, and there we pay some of the highest energy prices in the world. That's something we need to look into as well. Regulate our electricity prices because JPS is turning over like extremely high levels of profit. So we need to look into these things. Um, if we raise minimum wage, how do we ensure that people can survive on it and they're not ending up just spending most of their money going back into the hands of rich people essentially? Of course, they should be encouraged to spend, but on things that they want to and so that they can get by, not be struggling to survive and basically having to worry about where the next meal is coming from, how they're going to pay the next light bill, and so on. So yeah, the whole scrap minimum wage and have a living wage, it's semantic posturing. Minimum wage would have to be increased, and we need to be able to calculate a living wage. So we need to come up with a way of doing that and mandate that the government does that. Now the next topic is also related. It's BOJ and currency because Mark Golding has been talking about how people's purchasing power has been eroding. And yes, currency devaluation has led to an inflation of local prices because we're an import dependent economy. It's because we're such an import dependent economy why we actually have constantly devaluing currency value. Now, what Mark Golding said is that he accuses the government of, or he raises suspicion at least, that the government is intentionally weakening the currency, which we don't think is true. Um, could be, but what the real difference is that the government is doing now is that they have given BOJ some sort of independence, and BOJ, instead of intervening now in the market, they are encouraged to let the dollar go where it needs to go. And by where it needs to go, as in when you try to regulate the currency through monetary policy, as in when the BOJ tries to spend money to get the currency value at a place that feels more comfortable or looks like it's sliding slow, they have to spend money to do that. So they have to buy US dollars and then they have to sell the US dollars cheap or do flash sales, and that eradicates our reserves. And then when we sell it cheaper than what we buy it for, we lose money from that. So BOJ has actually lost money some years and a lot of money because of market interventions. Market interventions are not sustainable. In general, relying on the BOJ intervening in the market to stabilize the currency isn't sustainable. It can't be done. That's not a realistic policy. What we need to do to stabilize our currency is to become more productive as a country. A lot of things that we are importing, we could try to produce some substitute locally. We could try to develop agro processing and have value added goods from our raw produce, stuff like that. We need to develop locally, try to meet the needs of our people locally, trying to find ways of earning foreign currency so that we can afford to buy the things that we don't produce locally or buy the things that we can't produce locally. But that's what we need to do. We can't rely on BOJ to be intervening every time the currency value is going in a direction that makes us uncomfortable because it's not sustainable. And taken to the extreme, we won't be able to intervene in the market anymore, and then the dollar will go into free fall. It's a policy that they tried in Venezuela, where they tried to regulate the currency by having an official rate that the bank maintained. And what they would do, they would try to sell the currency. They would give priority to the businessmen because they claim that okay, they're going to use this to import things for retail and to like import machinery and buy things to support the manufacturing sector and so on. But they wouldn't use it like that. And then what they would try to do then is to hoard US currency and resell at whatever high price on the black market they could get. So the capitalists were abusing that policy. So it wasn't sustainable. And what you had is on the black market, the actual exchange rate was much different than the official exchange rate. So the government of Venezuela realized that wasn't sustainable and had abolished that. Now, government of Venezuela gets a lot of flack from economists who are not in Venezuela because they think that the government was naive for what they were doing in the first place. But since abolishing that and going to a free floating exchange rate, a lot of people have actually been upset. So it's something that the people wanted, and governments should do better to educate the people about how monetary policy works and the limitations of it. So we're not blaming Venezuela for what they were doing before or what they were doing now, because the main reason they're facing hyperinflation is that there's a blockade preventing them from trading. But we don't have the blockade. We could become more productive and decide that we need to export more high value things instead of only low value things. And some valued added things we could try to produce here instead of importing a lot of expensive things all the time. Like the three most, well, two of the most consumed grains in Jamaica, I believe, are rice and wheat because wheat make you bread. And Jamaicans also use oats for porridge, and we don't produce these things. We import these things. So that's something to revisit. We need to be producing more locally. BOJ cannot fix the currency problem. So now that the BOJ is no longer losing money, it can actually make money because it functions like a bank, but it's a state owned bank. So, in making money, the government is able to pull money from BOJ to support the budget. Whereas in the past, what would have to happen is that BOJ goes in the red and then the government has to bail out BOJ. So, the government has to allocate extra money to subsidize what BOJ has been doing, which is a big problem because it means that that was a cost to taxpayers and we didn't get any benefit because you intervene in the market, it affects things short term, and then the currency still slides anyways. So, what the government did in giving BOJ some sort of independence isn't actually a bad policy. It actually makes sense as a policy and it is saving us money. So, it is dishonest of Mark Golding to be saying that currency devaluation is a way of taxing the people and that the money that the government made it's through devaluing the dollar and whatnot. It's not honest. It would be a different case if you could say, okay, the government intentionally devalued the dollar by buying it for low and selling it for really high and they made a lot of money from doing this and they drove up the price. But no, they're private market manipulators that we're not accounting for that have been driving up the price. And again, if we focused on actual sectors of the economy to resolve the currency problem rather than focusing on monetary policy, we wouldn't be in this position or argument in the first place. Um, it's costing us either way because, again, if they were doing market interventions, BOJ would be running at a loss and then the government would have to bail them out anyways, which just doesn't make sense to do. It's not a sustainable policy, as I've explained. So right now, what the government is doing, it makes more sense, but we do really need to focus on developing our local industry, or else the currency will continue to devalue, and we won't be in a position to really have much buying power. We demand more foreign goods than the international economy demands from Jamaica. That is what we need to change if we're concerned about currency devaluation, not encouraging more market interventions by BOJ, which cost a lot of money. So the next thing now is the COVID measures. So we finished with the topics on the economy. So the next thing now is the COVID measures, right? So new COVID measures and vaccine diplomacy. So the first thing is the new COVID measures. So come next week, I believe on Monday, the government will announce some new measures that will become effective on Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. And we have to brace because they said that these will be very strict. We had given our own recommendations for what the government could or should do for COVID-19, and those included things like just an assessment of what they were doing before and how they could tweak things. So one of the things that we held was that we understand that the government has good intentions with the lockdowns and curfews, but they can actually be counterproductive to the goals of the lockdowns and curfews. We spoke about time density, and what we meant by time density was when you have less time for people to do things, more people will be doing things at the same time. So when they announced the lockdown, the national lockdown, a lot of people were flocking to the supermarkets at the same time, and that could have allowed the virus to spread more so than if they just never did anything at all. So we have to think about things like that. You have to think about households that do not have the ability to buy up a lot of food and store up a lot of food long term. And 2 weeks for a lot of people is long term. Some people buy grocery weekly. Some people have to buy things every other day or even every day, and that's a reality that we have to account for some people. So the government should consider doing food aid. Some members of parliament were doing things like that, like Floyd Green, had basically gotten different crops and stuff and put in bags and given them to some of the constituents. And that is the type of thing that we wish the government did on a national level, because it could really help people who are struggling with household food security. So there was a time they were doing a lockdown somewhere in East Jamaica there. When they did lockdown, there were either two communities in St. Thomas or right along Bull Bay there. They were doing a targeted lockdown, and they were distributing food, and then people were saying, this is not enough food, because when you see one house, it's actually a tenement yard, and it could actually be that three different families live there. And the government was saying, oh, well, this is why we need NIDS, because people could be lying about how many people live in a house. And we we want to dismiss that as rubbish. The government could really give out food aid without NIDS. That was a silly excuse for not giving out food aid. Right now, we should treat this as an emergency situation and in the best interest of our people. As we would spend money in a disaster, you could spend money to buy food to give people. And that does the dual job of bailing out farmers who lose from markets crashing and getting people to have food. Because what we had during some of the lockdowns, we had farmers complain about not being able to sell food, and we had households complain about not having food. Both of those things were happening simultaneously, and that makes no sense. During lockdowns, people complain about not having food, and on the TV, you're seeing farmers saying that their stuff are spoiling because they can't get them sold. How does that make sense? So the government could be doing food distribution and some sort of food aid. Now, we have to brace for whatever they announce, and we have to be critical, of course. Um, Scratch that about the brace and critical. Scratch that. Sorry, sorry, sorry. So yes, brace for new measures. Let's hope that the measures make sense. Let's hope that they issue mandatory work from home orders for the private sector for applicable jobs. Of course, there are some people that won't be able to work from home in the private sector, like people who work at gas stations and so on. So brace for that. Um, by the way, some of our recommendations were to prioritize some of those persons as well in phase two, persons who work in supermarkets and gas stations, because they come in contact with a lot of people every day. So yes, brace for whatever they might announce, but we're hoping that it's more work from home orders. We're hoping that whatever they do won't have too much of an impact on poor households, and we're hoping that if it does have such an impact, that the government will at least give some sort of relief to the households. Now, on to the last topic: vaccine diplomacy. Now, a lot of persons have been defending the government's foolishness. So the government has really failed to secure vaccines early enough, and that has been our position. The government really failed to secure vaccines early enough. The government could have started securing vaccines earlier. They gave an excuse for why they didn't accept Russia's offer for the Sputnik 5 vaccines, and they lied. They said that it's because the World Health Organization hadn't approved the vaccines. But at that point, they already made plans to source the AstraZeneca vaccine, which were not approved by the World Health Organization yet either. It was actually after Christopher Tufton rejected the Sputnik 5 vaccines that the World Health Organization approved AstraZeneca vaccines. And Christopher Tufton made it clear he had intentions to source AstraZeneca vaccines even before the World Health Organization approved them. So it wasn't their turning down of the Russian offer never had anything to do with WHO approval. They lied, and if they're saying they didn't lie and they want to deny it, they're just lying more. Don't trust them. They're liars. They're politicians. That is what a lot of them do. What they're really doing right now is kissing the USA's ass, and they documents from the US government showed that they actually pressured Brazil to turn down the Sputnik 5 vaccine as well. So this is not something that they're doing in secret. It's just that our government may be secretive um, about the real reasons they turned down the Sputnik 5 vaccine, right? So bear that in mind. Now, they turn on vaccines. They haven't sourced enough. The ones that they've sourced are taking long to reach. What is the excuse? Oh, we don't understand vaccine diplomacy. We're a poor third world country. And what happened to Vision 2030, by the way? Anyways, we're a poor third world country, and the bigger countries are hoarding the vaccines. Yes, we know this. We've been talking about this. We've been talking about imperialism. And we've been criticizing the current government for siding with these governments, for befriending these governments that treat us terribly. And other governments that aren't kissing America's ass, what are they getting? They're in a better position. They were getting vaccines before us. We kiss America's ass, we kiss Canada's ass, we kiss the UK's ass, and we get nothing out of it. What do we get out of it? Other countries aren't doing the same thing, and they're in a better position than us. When we criticize our government for kissing America's ass, what is the response? Oh, they're being pragmatic about foreign policy. What you're seeing now, them failing to secure vaccines, is pragmatism to you? Canada and the US both have more than enough vaccines to vaccinate their entire adult population, right? They have vaccines to spare that they can give away. The US is giving away some of their extra vaccines to Mexico. US and Mexico are in a very tense position right now. If you've been following what the if you've been following the bilateral relations between Mexico and the US, they're in a tense position right now because the current government of Mexico sides with Venezuela against the US, for example, and has been very critical of the US. And even though AMLO is referring to Mexican president, even though the Mexican president never got along with Trump, there was a whole thing about him not congratulating Biden and not recognizing Biden immediately and all of that. All of that is going on, and they're giving vaccines to Mexico. Yet we supposedly have strong relations with the U.S. What benefit are we getting out of that? So they tell us we don't understand geopolitics, we don't understand diplomacy. When we're saying be less like you're being right now and be more like certain other countries, and these other countries are doing better off, and we're talking about other poor third world countries, not rich countries. But they want to do what they're doing, and they swear that they're experts at geopolitics, and then they're going to come around and complain that the world is being mean to them. We don't buy it. You're kissing countries' asses, and you're not getting anything out of it. Meanwhile, other countries aren't doing that, and they're actually in a better position than us. How do you explain that? So that's what we have to say about this vaccine diplomacy foolishness. The government is just making excuses because it is terrible at foreign policy. And frankly, we're not even sure if the government cares about the people. They won an election and they're fine. So they've really just dropped the ball. They were handling COVID pretty well before the election until they decided to actually call the election. And the PNP is not allowed to come and bring that up as a talking point because they, including Mark Golden, endorsed the call for the election. So these politicians, don't trust them. They're disgusting liars. Most, if not all of them. So that is basically the set of updates that I have for you this week. So remember to tune in next week for our next update where we'll cover whatever happens in this coming week. Again, I'm Christoph Simpson, I'm a member of Lance. Have a good day, have a good week, stay safe. Um, in times like this, you may be getting feeling a sort of isolation because there are persons that you want to see that you're not seeing as often. And if you're not feeling that strongly, you have other people who may be feeling that. So call your loved ones, check on them, especially elderly people in this time. Do what you need to do to get by. Things rough right now. We are hoping for things to get better. So peace. Have a good day. Have a good week.